Hey everyone, welcome to Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special Podcast. I'm Joe Bartnick. As always, we have Mike Now, my producer. But today we have a very special guest, the only guest, the one and only Burt Sugarman is in the house.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Happy to be here. It's a lot of fun for me. It really is. Just sitting here with all the T-shirts and items and hats on the producer and all of it. I'm getting a kick out of it.
First of all, thank you from all of us, for me and Mike for doing this podcast, and thank you for the show, for just the 30, 40 years of just incredible entertainment you've given everybody.
It's funny. Boy, we started taping over 50 years ago, Joe. Wow.
It's still priceless, Burt. I still love watching all the YouTube episodes. It's so much fun. That's what we're here to talk about. But you're still out and about kicking it. You were just with Cher, or book reading. How did that go?
Cher released a book about 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, starting on her life. It's part one. It's 400 pages, part one, and part two comes out, I believe, next July or so. And she has written a book on her life. And this book goes up to about 1980, 85, right there. I loved reading it. I got the book. I loved reading it. I couldn't put it down. I mean, it's terrific, and I know so much about Cher's history because I've known her for over 50 years, personally. So for that reason, it was just wonderful to get to read the book and see things like her mother had been married 3 times to her father. And how did things like that happen in her life then was fascinating. And I've always enjoyed her, and she's a class act. She's wonderful.
I've only heard great things about Cher, and she has a million stories. But Burt, you have a million stories too.
I think Cher has more, but she was on stage at a theater and sat on a chair and talked for 2 hours about that book, and then handed the book out, a copy of the book, to everybody that was in the audience. I'm going to say there were 700 people. Cool. And we had just had a great time. My wife Mary and I were there sitting up there cheering her on, and she had a ball telling the first part of her story.
That must have been amazing. Well, let's hear the first part of this story of the Midnight Special. How did the concept come to you, and how did you get it on the air?
I was watching television, watching Johnny Carson, who I was a great, great fan of, and he happened to be my next-door neighbor. And Johnny and I played tennis together a lot in the afternoons. He taped his show around 6 at night, so he was free during the day. And I just watched his show. I was just such a great fan. And then when his show ended, it would go to an American flag and nothing. There was no TV. And I would turn to some channels around here and there weren't that many anyway, but there was no television when he went off. So I sat back, and I can remember sitting in New York with a friend of mine who was at an advertising agency in New York, and he said, yeah, we've got a lot of products that might work late at night if you came up with something. And together we came up with the thought, well, what would work? Music, maybe rock and roll. And then I said, no, but country is so much fun too. And he said, well, I like heavy rock. And so we said, well, let's do it all. And I said, I think I can put that together. He said, well, I got a job. I work at an agency, and I just love it. So I went back to California where I lived and started thinking about ideas, wrote down notes on paper and talking about it. And that started in 1972, I would say in approximately February, started writing notes down. And then I went to the network to try and get it on the air 3-4 months later.
You know, Burt, the show is just incredible for, I think, 2 real reasons. One, the artists are playing live. It's not canned music. They're not lip syncing. It's just live on television, which was kind of unheard of before then. And the other thing that I think makes it really special, especially for us.
Don't ask me too many things at once, Joe.
Okay.
I'll talk about live for a minute.
Okay.
Many of the acts were concerned and afraid about singing live. Why? Because they hadn't done it. Rock acts really didn't have a forum to go. Country acts were on the road. They lived in and out of their buses. They were performing 4 or 5 nights a week in front of live audiences. where some of the rock acts, they were known for their records, for their big records, their sound, but they didn't perform live that much. So now they walk into a huge place like NBC Studios and all these big cameras around and cords and people, and they were intimidated. And so we had to talk a little bit and work with them a little bit and then play back something they thought was just terrible that was really wonderful that they did. Might have been half of a song or something. So it took a little bit of having people get comfortable in a major television studio. And then we'd have somebody like Johnny Carson, when he finished his show, he would come across the hall and he would just walk around, hang with me a little bit. Once in a while he'd go and sit in the audience with young kids, and the acts would see Johnny Carson and just kind of flip out. So that made it easier too, that he was there and he was on TV and it was all going to work out.
You know, that helps clear out a question then from the audience. Rick Sackett asked, Dear Burt, Midnight Special fans recall Ed McMahon was a real fan and supporter of the series, even appearing in some episodes. Is it true that Johnny Carson wasn't a fan of the series for one reason or another? It sounds like he loved the series.
Rick Sackett, thank you very much for sending that question in, because Johnny was a fan. Johnny was a wonderful fan of the show. Whenever he could, he came over and watched this tape and had a great time, talked to the acts. He was fans of many of the acts. He liked country acts tremendously. He had heard the rumors about George Jones and his drinking, and George had done the show 3 times. And he went over, wanted to shake his hand and see how George was. Could he stand up straight? And I think George might have been straighter than Johnny then. But it's that kind of camaraderie that went on. And Ed McMahon, another wonderful fan. And Sackett, thanks for sending that question in, because both of them were fans and terrific. And McMahon would make suggestions to me on who ought to be on the show. Can you ask so-and-so? I love that song that just came out. So both those guys were great.
Look at Ed, such a great side man. He leads us into this next question. How did you decide who was on the show? Because I think that is the essence of what made the Midnight Special great. It was almost like a Woodstock, or where there's different acts, different types of music. You had rock, you had the Kinks, then you had Gordon Lightfoot Light, then you had the blues, you had B.B. King, Mighty Wars, you had Chuck Berry. You had a little bit of everybody.
When did you start watching the show, Joe?
When I was a little kid, I'd stay up and watch a little bit of like rock and roll, and then then it went away. But then luckily it came back on YouTube, and here we are.
To answer that question, it took a few groups here to decide who went on all the time. I was the ultimate person who approved it, but I had a wonderful staff. I had 4 or 5 people that were absolutely terrific. Susan, Debbie, Rocco Urbisi were on the staff, and they became quite well known. And they would make their suggestions on who ought to be on that particular week and why, and how putting this act with this act would be a lot of fun. Just what you're saying. Maybe this country act alongside this rock act. So that was one. The other was record companies. The record companies knew that if their act was on the show on Friday night, they could expect starting Saturday morning in the record stores, they would go wild. So they would pitch their acts, many of them big acts, and some of them I never heard of. That's how Christopher Cross came along with Sailin'. All of a sudden, that name came up. We didn't hear about him. We saw the charts. He was moving, and the staff played it, and that was a winner. You just loved that song. You loved the singer. You didn't know what he looked like, anything, but it was terrific.
The classic performance in a hockey jersey up there that everyone can remember. I can pick it out. I can see it.
There you are.
It was a football jersey. It was an Oilers jersey, if I'm correct.
Oh, yeah. you're pushing the city. I know what you're doing there. So it was the staff. It was record companies. It was things I heard because, of course, at that time, that's what I listened to. That was my music because I had to know who was going to go on next. And I had a few friends that I even knew at that time, like Paul Anka. But Paul Anka, before my show, was a social friend. I had not seen him perform. I had his records and this and that. And there, all of a sudden, everybody's saying, "Hey, Paul Anka." And I said, "I know Paul Anka," because, of course, most of the acts I did not know.
Right.
But there are a few that I did. Richard Pryor, I did know.
I was going to say, you became really good friends with a lot of people. You're a great guy, and you're very close to Richard.
Yes. Tony Orlando, Richard Pryor, Paul are just a few that Loretta Lynn that I was friendly with before. But Richard Pryor was kind of a local guy because he would be at the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard and perform locally. And I got to know him and got to like him a lot as a person. Funny, hilarious. There was nobody funnier, of course. But off stage, usually not afterwards because I couldn't stay up that late. This was 3 a.m. when he got off stage. But during the day for lunch, he and I would go for lunch at 12 o'clock, 12:30 or something, and sit and talk. And we talked so much about his life and where he came from and about his mother and this and that. And I really became just so close to him and admired him for his performances and what he said and what he did. And when he wanted to deal with racism, it was wonderful to hear how he would talk. And he would talk about Hispanic friends of his and how at first, all of a sudden, a grandmother here and there said, no, I don't want to be with that person. And then Richard would say, I want to go over to her house and sit with her if she doesn't feel comfortable with me.
Can I interject with an audience question?
Sure.
I think you're touching on something that Bob Walton kind of mentioned in the comments. He said, when you put these music lineups together, were you purposely trying to help integration? Black people turning in to see Chuck Berry would also be exposed to artists like Rory Gallagher. White people tuning in to see Aerosmith would also see the OJs. He loved the show for this reason and the incredible diversity.
I wasn't smart enough to think about that at the time. I did not. But once I got to the studio and they all came and I saw people meet for the first time and how they'd shake hands or stay back or say, Richard Pryor, I'm a little bit afraid of him. No, you don't have to be. Come on, I'll have him come in your dressing room. And all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, they're hugging and saying, come on, I want to go out and watch you in the audience. And everybody just got there, and people you weren't sure about or how they would react or what would happen, I'm telling you, they all got along. Everybody respected the talent of the other act.
I think that's the beauty of the show. How you brought people together, just great artists, and bringing harmony and peace and love. That's what makes it awesome.
I think today, in concert, singing in Las Vegas, I think 2 weeks ago, was the guy that I had on the show 50 years ago, a guy named Rod Stewart. Still drawing crowds, huge crowds in Las Vegas. Isn't that wonderful?
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Well, I'll tell you, a very good friend of yours I saw a couple years ago out in the desert, Tony Orlando. Incredible.
He has been one of my closest and dear friends with my wife. The two of us and Tony are just love each other. And my wife is Mary Hart, who was on Entertainment Tonight for 29 years. And she retired just 8-10 years ago. But Tony is a buddy. Tony is a pal. If we don't talk to him once a month, we feel like we're missing something. And, of course, he's got a podcast that's in New York and all over the country. And Tony is a wonderful, wonderful human being and a dear friend. And
well, I'm
going to
look into my camera and say it. Tony, we were on your podcast when we launched the Midnight Special channel, and thank you for the support. And we'd love to have you on our podcast now.
Here comes Tony. I'll call him and you tell me what date you want to make it work, and we'll talk to Tony. Happy to do it.
I mean, he's not even a triple threat. I think he's like a quadruple threat. I saw him do everything: sing, dance, play the drums, tell jokes.
And
it was
what
an incredible show.
What a drive in a live show. If you've seen Tony once, you got to go back, because he was on your table wherever you were. He jumped on your table. That's what Tony did. He'd sit down and bring people to come up on stage to sing with him, and he'd always have one or two that he knew could sing. Then he'd have a couple that were stiffs out there in the audience, and it'd just be fun. Tony's a wonderful person.
Now, I know you were also friends with a woman that my mother loves, the great Loretta Lynn.
Oh,
do you have
Loretta.
any stories you can share
Loretta,
about Loretta?
I'm a country music fan, and Loretta Lynn had a manager by the name of David Brokaw. His father was the famous Norman Brokaw, was an agent at the William Morris Agency and handled Marilyn Monroe and some of the major stars, Cary Grant and Clark Gable and all these people. And in fact, there's a book on Norman Brokaw that came out about 2 months ago. And I think it's called I Drove for Marilyn Monroe. And Just amazing, because he introduced me to Loretta, and I went to a couple of her shows, and I loved her writing. She wrote her own songs. Everybody doesn't know that, but if you think of Coal Miner's Daughter and things like When the Husband Would Come Home Drinking, that was her life. That was Mooney Lynn, her husband, with all those problems that she wrote about it. And her family and living in Kentucky. All of it was true. And sometimes after a show, I'd go back with David, and Loretta would just sing a couple of songs that I liked a lot and sit there with us, a cappella, and the purest voice in the world. And she wrote these songs herself. An amazing, amazing person. And Mooney didn't work, so she had to bring the bread home for a lot of kids in the family. And she was working all the time, and a smash hit up in Lake Tahoe for Bill Hara, and Las Vegas all the time. But she traveled in a bus, and she worked 5 days a week, live performance. So there were no nerves with her, none.
Right on. Yeah. I mean, she's as cool and collected as they can come. Another, one of the, you've had so many great just moments on that show, like just pictures in time. Like one of them was when you presented Jim Croce with his gold album.
Oh my gosh. I wasn't going to do that because I had made up my mind early on that I was not going to go on camera. I didn't want anyone to think I was taking their camera time or anything about it, and I didn't feel like doing it. I was on the stage producing the show right from the stage, talking to the director who was upstairs in a booth. And Croce says to me, by the way, I get this song. I said, yes, this executive president of your record company here is going to hand it to you. And Croce looked at me and said, no, he's not. You are. I said, oh, you don't understand. I don't go on camera. And Croce looked at me and said, Burt, well, you don't understand. If you don't come and hand it to me, I'm going to walk off stage. And with that, he took his guitar off. He laid it on the floor, and I said, well, hold it a minute. And he said, well, you hold it a minute. Get that record and give it to me, and I'll stay right here. I realized he was serious. He really wanted me to do that. Well, I took the record company, the record executive handed it to me, and I made the presentation to a wonderful, wonderful performer. And he had a fellow that accompanied him named Maury Muleback, who stood to the right of him. And we talked while I was up there and had a wonderful time. And he said, I'm having so much fun here doing this. I love meeting the other acts, spending time with you. I'm comfortable up here. I'd love to come back. I said, you come back. He said, I'll be back in L.A. in about 2 months. I said, you call me. You're going to be right on the show again. And unfortunately, and it does make me feel terrible to say it, he passed away in a plane crash just right after that. He and Maury, just terrible, terrible.
Oh, this might be an awkward segment. I was going to say, that seemed like crisis averted on the spot, on the set. Any crisis, you were a hands-on boss, leader, any other crisis is averted?
Too many to talk about.
Okay.
Whether it was cameras going out or somebody stopping Richard Pryor and saying, you can't say it on TV. And Richard just kept saying it. That was it. And something that we knew we could cut out, but little issues there and things like that.
Well, that's an interesting point. Did you have any notes from the network? Like, let's say, like how like the Stones couldn't say "spend the night together," or the Doors couldn't say some things. Was there any NBC executive trying to censor the Midnight Special?
That's also what Gail wanted to know, who said, okay, Mr. Mary Hart, thank you for bringing us live performances. And my question is, every week, how did you and the production team figure out how many minutes each performer gets, and how did the performers who perform material with questionable content go through network censors?
Gail, that's a long question, but a wonderful question. Thank you for sending it in. Richard Pryor knew what would work and what wouldn't. He was toying. It wasn't with the executives. The executives didn't want to get in the middle of that. It was people that came back to work for NBC, and it was their job to keep things clean. But Richard just played with them. He'd say things and say, oh, I can't say fuck, or I can't say this or that. Why not? People do it. Come on. And he knew what to say, and so he just toyed with them. But he was wonderful. He was on many times, and when I got cards, letters, and people screaming for him in the audience, Richard was always the people that screamed for it the loudest. It was amazing to have Richard Pryor on. The next part of that question, Mr. Producer?
It was, how did you decide how long and what amount of time you gave to the acts?
I knew the song or songs that I wanted out of a particular act. Got that from a terrific staff that I had, and also from the record company. But if the act would come to me and say, there's another song we're just going to let out soon, I'd like to do that, or 2 songs, would you mind? We'd always say yes, go ahead, always. And we would bank it and think maybe we'd want it for another show later in case they couldn't come when we wanted them and it didn't work out on their schedule. So pretty much they could do what they wanted. Comics came on, Steve Martin came on, not really well known at the time, but he said, I see I'm down here for about 8 minutes. I could probably do 20. I said, do it. Go for it. And that would happen fairly often. It was terrific. Freddie Prinze, another one who just said, I'd like to go on and on. Go for it, Freddie. You got it. Do it.
How was the flow of making that show? Did you just shoot 5 Chuck songs and then 5, let's say, Rory songs, and then go back to 5 rock band songs, or did you flip back and forth like it shows on television?
We let the act go for it because they would get into a groove after doing a couple of songs, feel warm.
Right.
Everybody's fingers were warm. They got used to being on television with a camera and this and that, and that's how we did it.
And you just cut it up post.
And we always had a little space between it, unless it was 2 songs that went together, and then we just let them do it together. But short of that, we'd have a little spot in between where we could put them in another show if we chose, or if they wanted to, I'd like to be out here next week, you've got so-and-so coming on. Could I come back and do something? And I'd say, I'm not sure I can shoot you next week, but I'll put that song in. Oh, wonderful. But I'd like you to do an intro to it now while you're here.
Right.
And we would work all that out.
Another aspect of the show that was great was the jamming. You had Rick Derringer and Edgar Winter. You had the Bee Gees and Chuck Berry. That must have been fun for you as well.
The shows were all fun. They were so much fun. And the acts, again, these acts didn't know each other. They came from College Station, Texas, where Willie and some of the people came from, or they came from Kentucky, and other acts came from New Jersey. I mean, they were coming from everywhere, and they didn't meet. You'd think there was a place for them to meet, and there wasn't.
So did they ever get to rehearse a little bit when they did some of these classic duets, like the Bee Gees doing Hey Jude, and like with Wilson Pickett? Did they get to rehearse, or did they just nail it on the first take like that?
They nailed it on the 4th take, not the first, but it was the first time they'd done it together.
Gotcha.
That was what would happen, and they knew they'd like to do something. You use a great example, the Hey Jude example. To just think about doing that song, having the Bee Gees do it with you. Oh, my gosh. Wow.
You went to Texas to film Willie Nelson. Tell us about that experience.
Well, I went to College Station, Texas, and they told me to stay in Austin because Austin was a real hot town, which it still is today, and they'd go on over. Well, that's what happened. We did it and had no idea the tens of thousands of people that would be at College Station, Texas, at the university there, and just watch Willie tear it apart. He had a couple of days there, and we just spent one full day and got Willie and a couple of other acts there.
I was going to say, that wasn't the only fun place you went to. I was going to say, you also filmed some over the pond, they say, in the UK, if you want to tell us about maybe the David Bowie floor show.
Well, we really wanted to get David Bowie, and the acts would tell us how unique to them David Bowie was. The acts all really thought he was really cool. And we called up, and he said, well, his manager said he's not coming over the U.S. for 6 months or 8 months. But if you want to come over, he's going to be at the Marquee Club performing in 2 weeks. Well, the Marquee Club was a club that here in the U.S. we read about as being the hippest club in London. That was the place to go, whether you're an audience or performing. I said, okay, whatever we were doing in 2 weeks, we changed. Flew over there. We go in there, set up our cameras, this and that during the day, and in comes a lady named Dushenka. I'm not sure if she's still in the show. I'd have to take a look at it myself since it's obviously 45, 48 years ago. But she was a pal of Bowie's. Okay, odd lady. Interesting. So there's Bowie. He comes in and he starts performing and doing things, and he is so nice and just terrific. And he's got a costume on, a unusual costume, and his hair in a certain way. And all of a sudden, quietly comes in on the side door, Mick Jagger, and he brings Marianne Faithfull. Oh, are you guys dating? Okay. And Mick went, shh, like that. So I didn't put that on camera because I knew he didn't want to. But they were adorable together. And Mick looks probably the same today as he did then, which is also amazing.
Right.
But David Bowie then started doing things he knew that Mick liked. And it was a wonderful 5 or 6 hours we had together taping and just watching him. He didn't need anybody's help. You let those cameras roll, and David Bowie was outrageously good.
Wow. Well, let's take some questions from the audience.
All right. Well, we have two that are about the Wolfman. So Wilton Sherman wanted to know how important Wolfman Jack was to the show, and Jeannie Rides wanted to hear a story about Wolfman because she believes there should be a movie about the Midnight Special.
Well, thank you both for sending questions in because I appreciate that very much. Wolfman Jack was a piece of gold.
Yes.
As many of you know, he was a disc jockey in Tijuana. Powerful, powerful disc jockey because it went all over the country in the United States. And everybody wanted Wolfman to play their songs. So it came through my head, well, if everybody wants it, then it'll make it easier for me to get some of these acts because Wolfman will be there every day. They're going to want to meet him and talk to him and get their records played by him. That'll be terrific. It became much more than that. Wolfman Jack was, you wanted to hug him. He had a little bit of a stomach on him, and everybody loved him. He was one of the nicest human beings I'd ever met in my life. He was a gentleman. He appreciated the acts, and yes, he did. When they were great, he played their songs over and over, and of course it helped sales and all. But more important, it was because of Wolfman that some of the acts I got that I might not have been able to procure. But they came on because he was there. He treated everybody like royalty. His wife was around once in a while. She was terrific. He was just a big love and a big hug of a man. Everybody loved Wolfman. How lucky I got.
Well, you mentioned that he helped you get some of these acts. This helps with another question then from Rich Sack. Dear Burt, was there an artist on your wish list that you were unable to book for the show, either due to budgetary reasons or scheduling or anything else?
Who do you have in mind?
Yeah, there weren't many that Midnight Special didn't get.
One of them I really, really wanted, but it just didn't happen, and he was a wonderful, close personal friend of mine, was Elvis Presley.
Wow.
And I just knew him so well for years and years, and we actually used to play flag football. You all know what that is. We'd go out to parks in Los Angeles, and there'd be a whole group of us, his guys and all, and fans did not realize that was Elvis Presley out there in a pair of Levi's and a big shirt or something playing football with everybody. So they just drove by and didn't stop. But when I decided it would be a good time was maybe 72, 73, and he said, I just got a little bit too much weight on me, and I'm going to get rid of that, and I'll do it then, and we'll have a lot of fun. And I said, okay. And then a year or two went by, and I saw that it wasn't changing much, but I asked him again. He said, no, I'm still not in the great shape for that. And he said, I won't let it go, though. We'll get it done. And, of course, he died. I think it was August 77.
Yes.
And so he was never on the show. And I've always felt bad about that, but I felt fortunate to have had him in my life. And I felt that was great. There were a couple of times I took the bus back to Tennessee from Los Angeles and got a chance to ride in the bus and stop along the way. And there was always an open lot there and throw the football around a bit. And then we'd walk into a touch of a diner and the people would say, hey, E, how are you? And they all knew him because that's where he stopped the same places every time he took that trip. And they were all friends of his. In these little small diners, that's where he wanted to stop.
As amazing as this podcast has been, Elvis playing flag football with Burt It's priceless.
Wasn't on my bingo card. I did not see that coming.
And when I met him on the football field, he would say, "Now don't mess around. Don't treat me different than anybody else. If you're going to hit somebody, you hit me the same way." And I guess I didn't do it for once or twice, and then he knocked me right on my butt one time. And he said, "I told you, don't be afraid to hit hard." And I realized he was serious.
That's a fantastic story.
Well, it sounds like that kind of leads into Thomas Smith's question. Hello, Mr. Sugarman. Did you ever party with any of the guests? You look like you were a Midnight Rambler back in the day.
Oh, my gosh. Thank you for that question, too. I was not a Midnight Rambler except to be at home looking for a movie or something on television that late. But a couple of the people, like Tony Orlando or Paul Anka, as I've mentioned earlier, I felt close to and comfortable with, and we would go out to dinner and stay out and just have wonderful times. And again, Tony has remained so close to Mary and I. And there were a couple more people like that were Loretta was another one. Just good friends. Cher for years and years and years. Sonny and Cher. And then all of a sudden there was no more Sonny for a while, but there was Cher, and that was wonderful. And then all of a sudden there was Sonny and Cher again. And then, of course, the TV show. So Cher has remained one of the most known human beings in the world, think about this, for 40, 50 years. And then to be in the movies and get an award, oh my gosh. I mean, the television
great
show. Great
actress and great humanitarian.
Just a wonderful, wonderful person. In the book, she's had things to say, and remember, she was also married to one of the Allman Brothers. And to read about, you don't know much about, you read about the Allman Brothers and you read about flying here and doing drugs and doing this and that. Well, her part of it is the book, and what a wonderful, charitable fella he was. And so it's nice to read a book like that from Cher and read about some of the people she was associated with and how many were just terrific and what they meant to her and how much. And when she was in down times, David Geffen, who's known in the music industry, came and held her up, she said, and made her life better for a while and brought her out of their doldrums. And so she really, you got to read this book if you're a fan of Cher. You just got to get this book because it's a human being so open about herself growing up.
I love reading books from interesting people. Are you going to write a book, Burt? You have a lot of stories.
I've not thought much about that. I don't know. I'd have to talk to my wife about that. She's mentioned 2 or 3 times to me. This is more fun to me, I think.
Yeah, well, we can sit here all day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the audience will just let you come in and do this once a month or maybe quarterly, and we'll take it all down, and someone can document it and start typing.
Well, everybody out there, I want you to know that if you write a note or a card or anything to the Midnight Special, if you do it online, I'll read it because I read all of them and appreciate it so much to have a chance to read your thoughts online about Midnight Special.
We love the feedback. It's the fuel of this show. There's a great question here I want to ask. Count Orlock, any truth that the Dave Clark Five were going to reunite for the British Invasion show hosted by the Bee Gees?
I have not a clue. I have no idea. And how close is Count Orlock to everybody out there? Not a clue.
The amount of details our fans know that it is a treasure trove. We like to call it a time capsule here because we're saving and documenting so many things from rumors and memories and photographs that we get sent. We're gonna go to your office and I'm gonna start digging through and scanning all of your photographs for the show.
Well, we got to give Count credit. He stumped Burt. I think that would happen.
Well, think about the Bee Gees, and they've been on so many times on Midnight Special, and their family, who you met early on, all of a sudden there's a new Bee Gee, a young one that came in and joined them, and then there's one less Bee Gee, and then another time they perform, there's 2 less Bee Gees, and the story, and right now there's 1 Bee Gee that's still alive. Lives in Florida publicly. And we've seen all that. And then things that have happened on certain times when we've had Marvin Gaye on. There's just stories that I can tell about things that have happened, and we'll do it on the next podcast we do, and I look forward to it.
That is the time capsule of the Midnight Specials. You see a moment in time where these acts were vibrant and at their peak. Is there any chance of maybe a reunion show or reunion tour?
I don't know. Do you want to host it?
I would love to
host it. What do you think,
it.
Joe?
Wouldn't that be awesome?
You with producer Mike? I mean,
Tony. I mean, my mom would have a heart attack if I hosted a show with Tony Orlando and Cher.
Oh my gosh!
Well, Anthony Laughlin wanted to know when the show's coming back.
That's a great question, Anthony, and thank you for writing in. I appreciate that very much. The show takes an inordinate amount of time to put together because the acts are all traveling now today. They're traveling, they're going, they've got TV, they've got live, they have record performances. Now they go outside the United States to perform. They go all over the world. Most of them travel in their own jets, and they're in Australia one day and they're in Tokyo the next. So I don't know how practical it is to get a whole lot of people together. But I would think that I'd love to have Tony Orlando sit here with us. He'd have a great time, just a great time.
It would be fabulous.
Yes, well, we let's do it. We'll make a phone call, and Mary and I will get Tony on the phone and talk to him. Sure.
Yeah, we can start going through the list for hours of people we should get on the podcast. So you guys out there, you tell us, who do you want us to try and reach out to? And I'll twist Burt's arm a little and see if we can get maybe Paul Anka on. And with the power of Zoom, we can talk to any of these people in their living room. So it won't be too tough. No private jets to Burbank this time.
I like that. I like it a lot. And everybody, tell us who you like. Maybe some people who have come around a little bit later who weren't on the show. Maybe we talk to them about it. So let us know what you're thinking, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks again. Thank you for watching and listening. Joe, thank you. Producer Mike, thank you.
Burt, I want to thank you. I want to thank your lovely wife, Mary Hart, sitting in. And thank you, Mike. This has been Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special Podcast. Thanks for watching. Happy holidays.